Señor Presidente.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I would begin by welcoming the presence of the Foreign Minister of Cuba, Don Bruno Rodriguez, at the General Assembly. Year after year, we meet in this forum with the unequivocal expectation that an end will be brought to the economic, commercial and financial embargo imposed against Cuba for more than 6 decades. We see that the member states of the United Nations have each year and overwhelmingly voted in favor of lifting the blockade. However, there is continued disrespect for this majority will of the international community and of the resolutions of this General Assembly. It would seem that we still cannot escape from the prejudices and intolerances that characterized the politics of the Cold War, which in historical terms has proven without question to have failed. In the context of the recent high-level week, the Secretary of Foreign Relations of Mexico reiterated our historic stance against the embargo and the call for removing Cuba from the list of states that support terrorism. The minister also said that Mexico will always advocate for the peaceful settlement of disputes and therefore rejects sanctions and commercial blockades that only harm the well-being of peoples and do not build regions of peace or of prosperity. Mexico also categorically condemns the application of Title III of the law of the so-called Helms-Burton Act. This is a measure that affects not only the sovereignty of the Cuban people, but also the national interests of third countries. It must be said clearly that any unilateral measure conceived of as a form of political pressure to influence the internal decisions of another state is a contravention of the principles of the United Nations Charter, as well as the constitutional principles of Mexico's foreign policy, and it is an impingement upon peace and stability between peoples. And it is the UN Charter itself which in Chapter 7 exclusively reserves for the Security Council the capacity to impose sanctions or other coercive measures for the maintenance of international peace. Therefore, Mexico maintains that there should be no sanctions of any sort beyond those that are adopted by the Security Council. Mr. President, Cuba is facing an economic crisis even worse than the one in the 1990s that is aggravated by the embargo and the strengthening of sanctions by the United States government. The country is even continuing to suffer from the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, while the rest of the international community has managed to turn the page on this page of our contemporary history. That is compounded by high international oil prices, which is the result of conflicts that Cuba has nothing to do with, and natural disasters that continue to lash the entire Caribbean, hindering growth and economic well-being through unilateral impositions is contrary to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and equality of opportunities, which is something that Mexico advocates for in all international fora. The Cuban people deserves a more encouraging future, and they deserve not to be subject to decisions that were taken in a historical, political, and economic context that is very far removed from the one we live in today. New generations of Cubans deserve to live outside of the context of confrontation that Cuba was put in by the circumstances of the Cold War. At the same time, relations between neighbors on the American continent, based on respect and mutual understanding, are essential for the growth and development of the countries of the hemisphere. Thank you very much.
I thank